Back in 1976, a book came out that proposed a completely radical new history of humanity. It wasn't just a new theory. It claimed our gods weren't gods at all, but flesh and blood visitors from another planet. It said the story of our creation wasn't written in some divine heaven, but literally in the stars. Today, we're diving deep into Zecharia Sitchin's incredibly controversial thesis from the 12th planet. So let's just start with the one question that powers this entire idea. Sitchin asks us to just, for a moment, consider a pretty wild possibility. What if all those epic tales, of gods and monsters and world-ending floods, what if they aren't just myths or allegories, but literal, historical records of things that actually happen? The source for this whole radical history, according to Sitchin, lies buried in the sands of ancient Mesopotamia. And it all centers on a civilization that seemed to just appear out of thin air, fully formed and shockingly advanced, the Sumerians. I mean, think about this. About 6,000 years ago, the Sumerians just burst onto the scene with a mind-blowing list of firsts. They gave us the first writing system, cuneiform. They built these massive temples called ziggurats. They had incredibly advanced math and astronomy, complex laws. This wasn't some slow, gradual development. It was like an explosion of civilization. And the question that's bugged historians for ages is how? Where did it all come from? And this is exactly where Zecharia Sitchin enters the picture. He offered an answer to this great Sumerian mystery, but he didn't do it by digging up new artifacts. Nope. He did it by rereading the ones they left behind and treating their myths like history textbooks. Now, you gotta understand, Sitchin wasn't your typical archaeologist. His background was in economic history and journalism, but he was fascinated by ancient languages, grew up around them, and even taught himself to read Sumerian cuneiform. So he approached their ancient clay tablets almost like a journalist would, as if they were practical records of real events, real people, and real transactions. So what did Sitchin believe these ancient records were actually describing? Well, get ready for it. He claimed they told an epic, almost cinematic story of alien intervention that happened long, long before any human history we know of. All right, so here is Sitchin's history of everything in a nutshell. He said the Babylonian creation story wasn't a myth. It was a scientific text. It describes this rogue planet, Nibiru, on a massive orbit entering our solar system. A celestial battle happens. One of Nibiru's moons smashes into an ancient planet called Tiamat, and boom, that collision creates the Earth and the asteroid belt. Okay, now fast forward a few 100,000 years. The people from Nibiru, who he called the Anunnaki, show up on Earth. Why? To mine gold. Sitchin claimed they needed it to create a shield for their own damaged atmosphere. But the Anunnaki workers got tired of the hard labor, so the bosses came up with a new plan: create a primitive worker. They took early humans, Homo erectus, and tinkered with their DNA, splicing it with their own genes to create us, Homo sapiens, a slave race designed to do the mining for them. It is a wild story, I know, and we're about to get into the actual evidence Sitchin claimed he had to back it all up. But first, if you're enjoying this deep dive into humanity's possible secret past, just take a second to hit that like button. It really, really helps the channel grow. So the big question is, where did he get all this? I mean, this is some seriously out there stuff. Sitchin's answer was that the proof was hiding in plain sight, encoded in ancient art, architecture, and language that everyone else had misunderstood. This little thing right here, a 4,500-year-old Akkadian cylinder seal, was basically Sitchin's smoking gun. He looked at this and said, that's not just a pretty pattern. To him, that big object in the middle is our sun, and surrounding it, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Moon, Mars, all the way out to Pluto, plus one more. The 12th planet, Nibiru. He believed this was a literal map of our solar system, made thousands of years before we ever discovered the outer planets. And he took that same literal way of thinking and applied it to architecture. See, mainstream archaeologists look at ziggurats and they see these huge symbolic temples, stairways to heaven to connect with the gods. But Sitchin saw something way more practical. He saw precisely aligned structures and pointed to ancient art, arguing these weren't just for prayer. They were literal launch pads and mission control centers for Anunnaki spaceships. Sitchin then connected his whole theory directly to the Bible. He zeroed in on that famous line in Genesis where God says, "Let us make man in our image." Sitchin basically asked, who is us? He argued that the original Sumerian stories, which he believed Genesis was based on, had the answer. The plural word Elohim wasn't some royal we, it was a literal reference to the council of Anunnaki leaders as they discussed creating their new worker race. As you can probably guess, these ideas were absolutely explosive. But how did the academic world take it? Yeah, not well. Mainstream scholars and scientists almost universally reject Sitchin's work, and honestly, their reasons are just as fascinating as the theory itself. The biggest hurdle for academics comes down to one thing: language. They argue Sitchin's translations are just not based in reality. They have ancient dictionaries from Mesopotamia, and Sitchin's definitions don't match up. Just look at this. The word Anunnaki, which Sitchin says means aliens, is understood to mean something like princely seed. The word Shem, which he called a rocket ship, actually means name or renown. The critics say he's just assigning these high-tech meanings to words that have perfectly normal, well-known definitions. They see it as invention, not translation. And let's go back to that cylinder seal, his big piece of evidence. Well, there's a huge disagreement there, too. Art historians point out that the symbol in the middle is a six-pointed star, which was a standard symbol for a star or a god, not for the sun. The sun had its own specific symbol. They think the dots are probably just a constellation, like the Pleiades, or are just there for decoration. And then you've got the basic science of it all. Astronomers are pretty clear on this. A planet on a 3,600-year orbit that comes swinging through the inner solar system is a recipe for absolute chaos. The gravitational pull of something that big would have completely wrecked the orbits of Earth, Mars, and everything else a long, long time ago. Our stable solar system just wouldn't exist if Nibiru was real. So even with this mountain of criticism from the experts, Sitchin's ideas didn't just fizzle out and disappear. Actually, the opposite happened. They flourished, found a huge audience, and left a really deep mark on popular culture. I mean, the numbers really do speak for themselves. His books have sold millions and millions of copies all over the world. The big takeaway here is that Sitchin's story, whether you believe it's fact or fiction, resonated with people on a deep level. It tapped into this modern desire for an origin story that kind of makes sense of our ancient, mysterious past, but uses the language of today: space travel, genetics, and alien life. And that really brings us to the final, ultimate question. Was Zecharia Sitchin this brilliant codebreaker who found a secret history that was hidden from us? Or was he a master storyteller who created a powerful new myth for our time, seeing rocket ships where there were just symbols and aliens where there were just ancient gods? Whether it's a forgotten memory or a modern myth, Sitchin's work makes you look at the past and ask that powerful question: what if? I'm really curious, what part of this whole story resonates the most with you? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoy this journey, please be sure to like and share. Thanks so much for watching.